The dark time. That is all that need be said to conjure an instance filled with a floating dread. Don't mention the beasts by name, for their name is a curse. 300 years since it began, yet the memory is fresh in the collective heart, a wound scarcely lanced. Kemet, weaker then, an ancient land, yet forever the suckling, its sustaining sustenance nursed from the river eternal. They were unknown for the most part, strange and foreign, those lands surrounding the great green sea. A shield of fatal desert and deep-devouring waters kept Kemet safe, impregnable. Part-time groups of conscripted farming men, largely made up of farming boys, with limited organized training and often led by inexperienced officers. This is what made up the mighty Kemet army. Under the standard of the state war god Montu, this solemn force would be called upon to participate in short-interval, usually bloodless skirmishes, to quell heated conflict between Kemet nobles, and less often, to conduct punitive campaigns to defend Pharaoh's dusty trading fortresses in occupied Kush. It was a tested, successful, and stable system of defense that maintained a wealthy and most often peaceful state that had endured since before the golden age of pyramid building. In fact, since the time of the Great War of Unification led by the warrior god King Menes, 1400 years earlier. Ma'at, strong and vigilant goddess of order, kept chaos under control. Chaos manifested in the murderous god Seth, though beaten back, could never be destroyed. He lay ever watchful for the slightest crack through which he could infiltrate the shield of the enemy. Unknown to but a few oracular priests and one or two disbelieving courtiers, Seth had found a crack into the peaceful order of Kemet. Ma'at was being compromised. Slowly, imperceptibly, she was losing her stronghold. It soon became apparent to most that something was wrong. Royal authority was being increasingly threatened. Princely nobles presiding over various provinces throughout the lower kingdom had long ago acquired a surreptitious hunger for increased wealth and power beyond that provided by their royal-appointed office. But now a pact had been formed, made up at first of only a few corrupt nobles, but later joined by several who were corruptible. Their goal? To gain power and wealth enough to rival that of Horus on the throne, the divine king, Sobek-hotep IV himself. Violent insurrection was their chosen path, and those sacrilegious rebels were soon backed by an army loyal to a promise of reward beyond possibility. Derisively, they marched under the standard of their treasonous leader's local regional god, Sobek the crocodile. Yes, the patron god of Pharaoh. But in truth it was insidious Seth, god of chaos, in his sometime guise of a crocodile, that gave power to this conurbation of evil. Civil war had come to Kemet, and all her resources were being strained as a result of this brutal internal conflict. The king's army, although outnumbering the rebel forces, remained responsible for the integrity of the trading forts in Kush, as well as the day-to-day police maintenance and defense of the ancient capital of Memphis, and those provinces still loyal to the crown, making a swift end to this blight discord improbable. It took 2 interminable years for Pharaoh's forces to crush the uprising. The rebel leaders were executed, their bodies burned, and their names obliterated from all written record. No chance for continued life after earthly death. All proven followers were scattered throughout Kemet as slaves. Many traded south to those remaining autonomous kingships of Kush. It was over. Grievous relatives were now able through sacred ritual and burial to launch the last of their dead into the presence of Osiris, great god of the afterlife. However, the war's effect on the stability of Kemet had been dire. Many townships were leveled or nearly leveled. and there was a pandemic of disease. Ma'at was slowly regaining her strength, but a return to order was yet forthcoming. Offering was made to the goddess of truth, immense oblation from the very hands of Pharaoh, but chaos continued to loom everywhere. It was then that they came, a sea of glistening chariots shadowed by an innumerable army of infantrymen, thundering across the land bridge of the Sinai Peninsula towards Memphis, cutting a swath of catastrophic brutality, death, and destruction. Surprise was a most lethal weapon against an undermanned and exhausted Kemet army. A strange, paralyzing numbness took hold of the people. They had survived so much, and were now faced with this. Never in the country's history had foreigners penetrated its borders. As the beasts approached the center of the capital city, the destruction abruptly stopped. For even the vile Asiatics feared the deities of Kemet, weak as they were, and would not dare defile the great temple of the god Ptah, patron god of Memphis. Here, just outside the structure's immense sandstone walls, the foreign general turned his army eastward, leaving the temple intact, to resume his unbounded slaughter in a push toward the dazzling royal palace of Sobek-hotep. All attempts to stop the onslaught were easily thwarted. Nearly 1,000 Kemet soldiers, now in furious battle mode, fell in the face of weapons never before seen in the land of the Nile. The immaculate, hallowed pathway leading to the palace was transformed to a scene of brown bodies, whole and in parts, scattered in the bloody wake of the invaders. They approached the god king's mansion with drums beating out a wild rhythm of victory. Inside, protected only by the royal court guards, Pharaoh, his family, and a few remaining loyal officials have retreated to a small audience chamber. The approaching drums beat in their ears as a dirge, harbinger of dark fates imminent. Yet Sobek-hotep and his queen, Tentopet, show no fear. The time is too short for such extravagance. They are in the midst of farewells to their two beloved children, the 10-year-old royal prince, heir to the throne, and his younger sister. They will be taken south, where it will be hoped that their lives will be spared. For the king and queen, escape will not be attempted. The invasion was too quick. More important to bring the foreign general to a halt here at Memphis, giving their majesties, the prince and princess, the best chance of making it to the hopeful safety of the upper Kemet city of Thebes. The couple have only reassuring smiles and calm didactic words for their progeny, who focus intently on their parents' faces, endeavoring to remain oblivious to the oppressive tension that mounts within the room. A moment later, with the blessings of Ra, god of the sun, god of gods, from all who remain, the tearful yet biddable children are gone, accompanied by 2 trusted members of the king's coterie who will act as caretakers, guides, and protectors unto death. Outside the yet breached splendor and sanctuary of the stateroom, the sounds of battle and ululations of death, which up to this point had been blaring, now became deafening as the outer barriers that protect the tranquility of the palace are penetrated. Now entirely on foot, the beasts march quickly, drums thundering, led by their general in the very direction of the refuge of the king, who orders all remaining court officials and guards to depart while they still can. They reticently obey, silently passing through the same hidden door through which the previous party had made their escape. Pharaoh and his queen move with equanimity to stand before their royal chairs and await the inevitable. It isn't until the last few seconds that the shock of what is happening can be seen on the faces of the royal pair. Yet as the gold-encased double doors of the room are ruptured, Sobek-hotep and Tentopet, with a prayer to Ra, are anchored, unmoving. Once inside the entrance, the general and his infantry are struck by a sight that stops their march where they stand. War drums fall silent as all inside the doorway stare into a sumptuous room, empty, except for two glorious figures positioned before a matching pair of golden, jewel-encrusted thrones, on the back of which are magnificently carved representations of the pair dressed as they are now, in full royal regalia. Sobekotep, tall and swarthy, wearing a tunic of the finest white linen. Around his waist lay a broad belt of gold inlaid with lapis lazuli, and carved with his cartouche-encircled name. Covering his chest is a wide collar of solid gold, and in his hands rest the crook and flail, sacred symbols of sovereignty. On his head sits the double crown, divine emblem of the long-ago joined kingdoms of Lower and Upper Kemet. Tentopet is a dark-skinned, lambent-faced beauty in a sheer linen-sheathed dress with broad shoulder straps and covered with a fine netting of the richest turquoise. She is crowned with the blessed golden cobra diadem, the uraeus. The general is irresolute. What to make of this unexpected scene? Looking past walls covered in a panorama of exquisitely lifelike painted marshlands filled with geese flying and feeding, he focuses on delicately carved palm tree pillars of red Kemet granite that surround him. Unaware of their beauty, yet all senses alert, perusing for some sign of ambush, some trick, magic perhaps. He can see nor sense nothing. His eyes rest on the king, then focus on royal coal-lined eyes. Within these eyes lay resignation. Now the general understands. A sacrifice has been offered. A sacrifice to a new and terrorizing god. The general speaks, his voice corrosive, in broken Kemet, thick with the accent of his native tongue. Yes, I am Salatis, new god to you and your people. You are for me. I accept sacrifice. Salatis slowly and confidently approaches the unarmed and motionless king and queen, stopping inches away from Sobekotep. The air between them becomes a sickening mixture of rancid sweat, raw shadfish, and fragrant mandrake oil. Would there now be fear in the king's brown face? Salatis can find none. Sobekotep puts out his hand to Tentopet, who grabs it softly. The general smiles. This is the signal. Scimitar now in hand, the curved blade flies with wild, febrile precision. Blood, warm and enveloping. White linen stained, stone floor flooded red. Sobekotep falls. Tentopet does not speak, heart not quailed. Pulling her beloved's face toward hers, she fills his dying view with her familiar, adoring visage. Salatis, his feral eyes still full of mad fire, backs a short distance away from the now dead majesty and his grieving widow, fully aware that only half his expected sacrifice has been received. With one lifted, red-splattered hand, that full measure of due offering is satisfied, as every soldier who can fight his way close enough uses scimitar, club, fist, and foot to eviscerate the queen. That marked the beginning. The dark time was upon us. Salatus and his force roaming our homeland, engaged in frenzied depredation, had no idea that the chaos brought to this conquered country was not wholly of their doing, but an act of complicity. The ancient enemy of order, malevolent Seth, strong and vigilant, had won. The invaders founded their own capital, a fortress city impregnable, in the delta at Avaris. From there, under the tyranny of King Salatus, vile tentacles stretched south to touch every corner of Lower Kemet, where no citizen was spared the degradation of occupation. Thousands were killed, turning the Nile red with their blood. Whole provinces taxed to the brink of starvation, forcing those who were able to resettle in Upper Kemet, where resources dwindled to catastrophic levels. We were, all of us, made little better than slaves to foreigners who not only stole freedom, but culture as well, claiming the history and gods of Kemet as part of their own. 130 years later found us still under the domination of the occupiers and their patron god, Seth. Among their accomplices, hundreds of traitorous natives of Kemet, puppets of Avaris. Their efforts helped to crush many a rebellion from Upper Kemet. Led by a determined princely family centered at the ancient patriotic stronghold of Thebes, city of the god Amun, these rebels, at first a mere manageable irritant, had lately, through pure determination and courage, become a disconcerting threat to the then king of the foreigners, Apepi. The current had gradually begun to shift, and this fact was forefront in the minds of the noble Thebans. Most imperative were weapons, not those native to Kemet, but the devastating weapons of the Asiatics, their bows much heavier than those of this country, able to launch an arrow that travels further and much deeper into the flesh of its target. The scimitar, a curved, remarkably sharp sword that makes unrecognizable mud out of its victim. And above all, the chariot, a nearly inviolable horse-drawn platform on wheels that easily breaks through serried ranks of infantry, allowing its riders to strike with quick, accurate, deadly force. The precise make-up and method of construction of these tools of war had been a brutally guarded secret for 3 centuries. All attempts to crack their magic had failed, and gaining that knowledge was the key. A few of the hated that knew those secrets, master weapons makers, had been captured over the years, but they had sworn to their god that they would give their lives before revealing what was buried within their hearts, and no amount of threat or torture had been able to break that vow. Efforts had been made to simply capture the weapons of Avaris, enough to bring victory to the rebels. But that too failed, for they were not able to obtain the intact numbers needed to make a substantial difference to the outcome of battle. The leader of the Theban revolutionaries was a confident, black-skinned prince named Kamose, who had recently acquired his position of predominance after the death of his brother at the hands of the beasts. Brave Sekenenra, he had known no fear in the face of a force that, like an infernal Khamsin, proved indomitable, dying in excruciating agony of a crushing battle-axe wound to the skull. He was a boy, a youth with the hands and mind of a master. Apprenticed at the unheard-of age of 5, he had amazed his mentors with his speedy grasp of the intricacies of weapon-making. After a period of only 9 years, he was proclaimed a master artisan of the Avaris weapons works. For one of his tender years, this accomplishment was astounding. News of it spread throughout the delta, then south, finally reaching Thebes and the ears of Kamose. Obsession with the idea of capturing and controlling this youth crept upon the Theban prince like an ingesting cobra, enveloping him completely. No time for other matters. For Kamose there was only one, and this boy was the solution. Solemn colloquy with trusted counsel eventually gave birth to a plan. A party of 3 tenacious Theban warriors would make their way north to the delta, Silently sailing by the moon's light would mean slower progress, yet less chance of being detected. Those natives loyal to Apepi were often not apparent. Thus contact with anyone should be avoided. Once outside the massive fortified walls of Avaris, the rebels began a course of action now muddled by the passage of time. Legend supports the fierce killing and disfigurement of a young fisher boy of similar age and height as the weapons maker. A miraculous kidnapping in the fisher's body supplants. Exactly how the dauntless three were able to enter the fortress has long been immersed in a somewhat bitter mire of speculation. But whatever the truth, it could only have been through the divine interception of the blessed Hidden One, Amun of Thebes. However, there exists no doubts regarding the truth of this one fact. Kyan, the master weapons maker, was captured and placed under the complete domination of Prince Kamose. At the age of 14 years, it did not take long for the divine vow made to his god to be forsaken. Compliance, even loyalty, could then be guaranteed. Training the entire rebel army to use these now plentiful, newly made weapons took time. Secrecy was of the utmost importance. One substantiated rumor to Apepi would certainly bring his entire forces to bear down upon Thebes before they were ready. For a beast can be at its most dangerous once it believes it has lost the upper hand and might soon be pushed against a fortress wall. The prince and his council sat silently. Among them was Amose, son of Sekenenra, and nephew to Kamose. He was next in line to lead the Thebans, and had recently won the right through noble deed to speak at council. Each man envisioned sublime victory, for they all agreed that their warriors were ready. The magic embodied in the weapons of the Asiatics was now their magic too. They died in a state of disbelief, those betrayers of their Kemet ancestors. The sight of horse-drawn war chariots bearing down upon them, killing with Asiatic arrows, had they been deceived by their god Apepi? Inscrutability was not slacked by their recognition of the attackers as not being the army of Avaris, but men like themselves, the brown-skinned soldiers of Upper Kemet. Those who remained alive as the raging blades of atonement hacked their way toward them could not or would not reconcile the possibility of what was happening. In this state they fell, joining an ever-growing heap of sundered, bloody bodies left like butcher's offal to rot in the fly-infested heat of the sun. This scene was repeated again and again as the divine force of the Theban army pushed northward, in chariot, on foot, and in river-sailing ships toward what they knew would be the battle decisive. Apepi ordered all loyal minions surrounding Avaris to report to the fortress city along with unbeaten legions. They would buttress mighty walls never penetrated by an enemy. The standard of Amun went before Kamose and his troops as they approached Avaris. This blessed deity was their focal point, the source of divine strength that gave the Theban commander assurance that the last days of evil domination upon his country were near. However, it quickly became apparent that the army of Avaris would not be drawn out of their city to do battle in the field. If Kamose wanted Apepi, he would have to go in and get him. In that case, the prince would bide his time, attack when he was strongest. A few days' rest for his throng after their exhausting drive north would ensure a cataclysmic pounding that would crumble mighty walls, exposing an Asiatic king subject to the reconciliation of a debt long overdue. Kamose alone would make the final decision as to when the attack would take place. He hoped that a constant anticipatory vigil on the part of Avaris would soon make them stress-weary. On the night of the 17th day, unusually dense clouds blocked the illuminating body of Nut, the sky goddess. This was the signal. Under the cover of this starless night, Kamose ordered the attack to begin with full-force thrust of battering rams and siege ladders against the wall of the city. It was a clamor designed to startle, causing the bulk of the Avaris forces to move to defend their great primary gate. The yells, groans, and screams of war escalated as more and more troops from both sides made their way to the wall to attack and repel. Few Theban warriors escaped the deadly hail of arrows and slashing scimitars of the enemy to successfully scale the wall to do battle inside the city. But Kemet archers with shots furious and aim true managed to increase that number with each passing moment. As the turmoil raged, Chemose set in motion the most decisive aspect of his plan. With relayed signal, the fortress was approached from the rear by 4 large warships powered by in-sync oarsmen, their blades cutting silently into the murky water, gliding the vessels to the base of the mammoth wall that lined the river. 20 experienced, black-skinned Theban climbers, each carrying coil of heavy rope attached to his side, disembarked directly onto the facade. Protected by the starless, inky darkness of that night, they began their perilous climb to the top, using near imperceptible cracks in the granite wall. The soldiers waiting below watched motionless, giving silent prayer to Montu, god of war, to keep these brave comrades from falling death. One clinging figure suddenly lost firm grip and plummeted arrow straight to disappear soundlessly into the depths. Those men close by perused the spot, hoping to see their companion reappear, then become impatient when that hope continues unfulfilled. At last, human head breaks the water surface and the climber signals with raised arm that all is well, before calmly rejoining welcoming warriors. The silence is broken by the distant sound of negligent Avaris archers being overpowered and then dispatched. They had been relatively small in number, assigned to guard this assumed to be unassailable portion of barrier. Within seconds, anchored ropes are dropped to allow Amose and his massive detachment to quickly scale the wall and join those bold Thebans waiting inside. Their attack is swift, too swift for alarm to be sounded. These hundreds of Kemet warriors slaughter all in their path as they make their way through the city toward the primary gate, where Chemose and the bulk of his army continue what has become a seemingly futile struggle to fully penetrate that wall. Protected only by divine providence, the commander himself has valiantly made his way over to join his outnumbered infantry ensconced just inside, and with leonine precision cuts down enemy after enemy while anticipating that at any moment relief would come via reinforcements fighting their way from the rear of the fortress. It happened so quickly few noticed. Chest pierced, arrowhead penetrating through shoulder blade. He was gone. Those followers of Chemose who did see fought on through rising grief. Thebans battling inside the fortress wall continued to face massacre while those vast numbers outside maintained their push to fight their way through a relentless, serried mass from which arrows flew and scimitars flailed. Most were flung back to the ground, chopped to death or dying. Was all lost? Where was Amose? He could see it. The ear-flaying clamor of the battle could also be heard even above the screams of the scattering of our citizens. The city's great gate would be reached in minutes. As Amose and his detachment approached, the indiscernible mass of warring men became an in-focus view of Asiatic warriors cutting down near-quailed soldiers of Thebes. Those forces of Kemet, fighting outside, began to realize that the unbreakable barrier at the top of the wall had begun to relent. Salvation had come. Confidence overcame uncertainty, as first tens, then hundreds of Theban warriors were now able to make their way over the wall. The gate was open. Thousands marched through. The Avaris army was trapped from in front and behind, yet the battle continued to roar unabated. They would not surrender. Apepi and 2 protectors break away from what has become a lost cause to make their way unnoticed along the same path, now strewn with motionless bodies and filled with consuming fire, that had brought Amose through the city. At the rear wall, they joined several still surviving citizens in a desperate leap from the top of the structure to the river below. Few emerge, but Apepi and his 2 defenders are among them. Struggling to shore in a state of near-drowned panic, they traveled a short distance east, where they took possession of a small papyrus reed boat and rowed north to Kemet's border. Ra was reborn. His life-giving rays revealed a scene of jubilant celebration amongst unimaginable slaughter. The occupiers of Kemet were no more. Sacred incense rose to caress the blessed nostrils of Amun, its powerful fragrance somewhat masking the growing stench of death from bodies scattered alone and in piles, within and without the walls of dead Avaris. "Where is Apepi?" The question came from the lips of Amose, now leader of not only the Thebans, but all of Kemet. Escape for the abominable beast could not be accepted. With rapid preparation, the prince, accompanied by 3 stout charioteers, set off to give chase to the surely northern-bound king of no one. They had sailed to the mouth of the Nile and then made their way east on foot toward Canaan. Contact with members of those nomadic shepherd tribes from which their history says they sprang would mean salvation. If not, death in the fatal heat of the Sinai desert would be their fate. Apepi, far from a young man, was soon forced to succumb to the undignified position of being carried on the shoulders of his 2 virile defenders. Yet the 3 labored onward, sharp-eyed and desperately hopeful. What was it? It was not human, but some indiscernible monster of the desert, a giant tentacled creature seeming to roam aimlessly, searching, hungry perhaps, maybe full of magic that could harm or even kill. Horses halted. Not one of these pursuers had ever crossed the northern boundary of Kemet. What horrors might await had not been considered, and now memory of legend, thought, myth began to rush into their hearts. Stories of dark forces, deadly creatures like the shape-shifting Salawa that will shred and eat a man, leaving nothing to pass into the glorious afterlife. It is Amose that finally breaks free from frozen stillness to slowly pull his chariot forward. Anxiety brings perspiration far beyond that gifted by Ra. Courage feeds rising courage, moving those still frozen to fall behind their king. Eyes see clearly, heart remain brave. Amun, protect us. Amose's prayer is answered, for the creature transforms into 3 peregrinating men of the desert. Apepi and his bearers stop their tread. Red faces anguished, they turn to face fast approaching fate. The voices are everywhere. Amose is possessed by them, the unrelenting cries and whispers of Kemet ancestors. They utter one word: revenge. Bearers' futile defenses are quickly overcome. It is only Apepi that remains alive. Trembling resignation bends his knees to kneel before his master with head-bowed obeisance. Apepi! It is the ancestors who speak. It is Amose's voice that is heard. With his left hand holding the beast by the throat and his right holding battle club firmly, the king brings 2 crushing supernal blows down upon Apepi's head. Skull splits, eyes pop, teeth shatter. Red sand encircles leather-clad feet. Ma'at, powerful again, has won at last. Apepi's mangled body is brought back to Thebes as a defining symbol of the resurgence of order. Many travel long distances to view the bloody remains before they are finally removed from Kemet and given to the distant desert to be consumed by its voracious sand. It was time to rebuild and to build anew, not to be conquered, but to conquer. Under Pharaoh Amose, Kemet regained that former strength lost so long ago. A new dynasty of Theban kings was founded. Ra, god of the sun, king of gods, in his grateful and generous wisdom, joined with the patron god of Thebes to become one, yet remain separate. Thus Amun was reborn as Amun-Ra, the super-powerful patron of Thebes. Led by this war god of the sun, Amose and his descendants, with armies invincible, battled to push the borders of Kemet northward and southward, to make servants of Pharaoh every king of every land from the state of Naharin on the far side of the Euphrates to the ancient city of Napata, farther south into Kush than ever before. Treaty and royal marriage sealed diplomatic relationships that brought rich tribute from conquered lands pouring into the Nile Valley, no slower than the waters of the life-giving river could carry them. Gold is as plentiful as dust. A great debt was owed to all the gods, but most importantly to Amun-Ra. Pharaoh's gratitude was nearly unbounded to this sacred patron of Kemet's army. Tribute near equal to that received by the king filled the coffers of the temple of this god. In addition, King Ahmose gave the gift of his wife and cousin Ahmose-Nefertari as bride to Amun-Ra, and from this union was born the pharaoh's son and successor, Amun-Hotep I. All female descendants of blessed Ahmose-Nefertari would now and forever hold the title heiress, for they inherited the embodiment of a direct path through marriage to legitimate kingship. 6 warrior god-kings have reigned from the time of Ahmose to the present. 2 called Amun-Hotep, 3 named Thutmose, and 1 wise and powerful female, the divine Hatshepsut. I tell this history, Majesty, not only for your entertainment on the eve of your beloved son's marriage, but as an offering in gratitude for your generous blessings upon our country. May you live forever, Thutmose IV, great god-king, Horus on the throne, lord of Kush, father of Syria, son of Ra, who placed you with his own hands as pharaoh in Kemet. The king sat silent, staring blankly at the top of the shaved head of the exhausted and now prostrate storyteller. So much history, so much accomplished by those avenging princes of this country, his forefathers. The blood of those warriors runs through my body. Yet do I really belong? Am I truly one of them? He thought. Finally, Thutmose finds his voice. Wonderful. Thank you. My blessings upon you. If it was possible to mold himself further into the floor, the storyteller would have. For Pharaoh's praise meant some reward would come his way, perhaps a bit of gold, or could a tiny plot of land be conceivable? Now sleep calls to your king, and he must answer. With undiminished gratitude for a story well told, I give you permission to seek out whatever may beckon you. Again Thutmose falls silent, disappearing into his thoughts, yet maintaining a deceptive face of confidence. Horus on the throne, that is what this teller of stories called me. Horus, sacred embodiment of Pharaoh. Does the falcon god envelop me with his insulating wings? Yes, I am king. Any doubts regarding that fact will tomorrow be forever silenced. Thutmose's thoughts bring him back to his sleeping chamber to find that he is now alone. He had not seen the obeisant figure rise, then creep out of the dim light of the room to vanish into shadow. The mask of confidence leaves his face. He would not call for anyone to undress him. The presence of even one other at this moment would be unbearable. The king knows well why he is so anxious. Anxiety has visited him constantly during his short reign. But after tomorrow, after the contract of marriage is sealed, anxiety will end. There will be no more low whispers amongst powerful nobles of the court, at least none that need be worried about. He would be the irrefutable king of the 2 lands, not only placed on the throne by Ra, but with a firstborn son wed to an heiress, wife of the god, direct descendant of the blessed Ahmose-Nefertari. Come, sleep. Fall upon me in your peaceful incarnation. No dreadful dreams tonight. His couch is comforting. Weariness overcomes him. And then, a smell indelible. The hot grass and dusty scent of the southern plains. It invades Thutmose's nostrils. He can see them once more, those attacking king of beasts. Their vicious, deafening roar vibrates within his head. A prince mauled, and Thutmose is the only human witness. He stands unmoving, unmoved, and unafraid, watching for any signs of life. But how could there be any? for Tutmose has human blood on his scimitar blade. He wipes it clean, yet it always reappears, blood from a young man's throat newly slashed. No lion made this wound. The sun, its rays folded like arms across his face, mournfully drops from the sky as the long-dormant god of chaos appears. Seth joyfully embraces his servant. He lifts him up with cold, grateful arms. Fear finds Tutmose. Guilt overwhelms him. Looking down from within Seth's tender grip to see the pitiful and sanguine remains of his brother, Prince Royal, heir apparent. He longs to detect severed fingers renewed, shredded chest whole and suffused with breath, throat restored. Ra, in the guise of a whispering sphinx, had promised Tutmose the throne. Uncover me from my prison of sand, and I will make you pharaoh. I heard the words. My brother is dead, an unthinkable, horrible accident. But now the throne has been promised to me. The body of the heir apparent is brought back for sacred burial, prepared by the mortuary god Anubis and his priests of the dead. 70 days of preparation. They must have seen the truth. Tutmose is awake, startled and disturbed by the familiar, inescapable vision. It held him pinned to his couch, repeating again and again behind eyes staring into soft moonlit darkness. Kneeling over his brother's lion-clawed body, he makes the fatal slice into his throat. The prince's eyes open, they stare horrified. Then turning toward Tutmose, they fill with painful, entreating accusation. Those eyes are emblazoned upon the king's heart. He will never escape them.